The storm came down like the wrath of heaven itself, turning the Wyoming plains into a sea of mud and fury. And Kaleb Lawson had just decided to call it a day when he heard the desperate bleating cutting through the thunder. He'd been fixing the fence line near his property's eastern edge when the clouds rolled in, black and mean, reminding him of the storm that had taken Martha 3 years back. She'd been caught out riding when lightning struck near her horse, spooked the animal so bad it threw her against the rocks. The memory still made his chest tight, but time had dulled the sharpest edges of grief into something he could carry without collapsing under its weight. The bleating came again, closer now, accompanied by a woman's voice calling out in frustration. Kaleb squinted through the rain, his worn hat doing little to keep the water from his eyes. Through the gray curtain of the downpour, he could make out a figure struggling up the muddy path toward his ranch. As they drew closer, he realized it was a woman in a soaked traveling dress, her dark hair plastered to her face, pulling on a rope attached to what appeared to be the most stubborn goat he'd ever laid eyes on. The goat, a scraggly gray and white creature with horns that curved back wickedly, had planted its hooves in the mud and refused to budge another inch. The woman tugged, pleaded, and finally seemed to notice Kaleb standing there watching the spectacle. "Please," she called out, her voice raw from shouting, "I need help. My wagon broke down about 2 miles back, and I saw your ranch from the ridge. This stubborn beast won't move another step." Kaleb didn't hesitate. Whatever his feelings about opening his home to strangers, he wasn't the kind of man to leave anyone out in weather like this. He strode forward, his boots squelching in the mud, and reached for the rope. "Let me try, madam." The moment his hand touched the rope, the goat let out an indignant bleat and suddenly decided to move, but not in the direction anyone wanted. It lunged sideways, slipped in the mud, and crashed directly into Kaleb's legs. He went down hard on his backside, mud splashing up around him, and heard the woman gasp, "Oh no, I'm so sorry. Barnaby, you horrible creature." She rushed forward, extending her hand to help Kaleb up. "He's been impossible all day. I'm beginning to think he planned the whole wagon breakdown just to make my life difficult." Despite the mud, the cold rain, and the indignity of being knocked over by a goat, Kaleb found himself almost wanting to smile. Almost. He took her offered hand and pulled himself up, noting how small and delicate her fingers felt in his calloused palm. "Barnaby, is it?" "Yes, and he's usually not this terrible, I promise." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, and for a moment the storm seemed to fade into the background. Her eyes were a deep brown, warm despite the cold rain, and filled with a mixture of embarrassment and desperate hope. "I'm Helena Oakes. I was traveling to Centralia to meet my aunt, but the wagon wheel hit a rock, and the axle cracked, and then Barnaby got loose, and everything just went from bad to worse. Kaleb Lawson. My ranch is just up ahead. Come on, we need to get you both inside before this storm gets worse." He wrapped the rope around his hand and gave it a firm tug. Barnaby, apparently satisfied with causing chaos, now trotted along docilely beside him. Helena fell into step on his other side, shivering visibly now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "I can't thank you enough. I thought I might have to shelter under a tree, and with the lightning, I knew that was foolish, but I didn't know what else to do. You did the right thing heading for the ranch." Kaleb kept his voice steady, professional. He'd grown accustomed to solitude over the past 3 years, and having a woman on his property again stirred up feelings he'd buried deep. The way she moved beside him, trying to match his longer stride, reminded him painfully of Martha. But Helena was different, he could already tell. Martha had been quiet, contemplative. This woman had a spark to her, visible even through her exhaustion and distress. The ranch house came into view through the rain, a sturdy two-story structure Kaleb had built with his own hands 7 years ago. The barn stood beside it, red paint fading but still solid. He led Helena and Barnaby to the barn first. "Let's get your goat settled. He'll be warm and dry in here, and I've got some hay he can have." The barn's interior smelled of horses, leather, and old hay, a scent Kaleb found comforting. His 2 horses, Ranger and Belle, nickered softly from their stalls. Helena looked around with evident relief as the rain stopped pounding on her head. "Oh, this is wonderful. Thank you so much." She moved to help settle Barnaby, but the goat had already found the hay pile and was munching contentedly. "He's going to eat you out of house and home, I'm afraid. He has an appetite like you wouldn't believe. I've got plenty to spare." Kaleb found himself watching her as she fussed over the goat, making sure he was comfortable despite the fact that the animal clearly cared for nothing but the food in front of him. There was something endearing about her concern, her gentle hands checking Barnaby over for any injuries from their ordeal. When she was satisfied, she turned back to Kaleb, and he noticed for the first time how young she was. Mid-20s, perhaps, though there was a weariness around her eyes that spoke of hard times. She was pretty in an understated way, with a heart-shaped face and full lips that looked made for smiling, though she wasn't smiling now. "Now let's get you inside and into some dry clothes," Kaleb said, leading the way out of the barn. The rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, but the sky remained dark and threatening. They hurried across the yard to the house, and Kaleb held the door open for her. Helena stepped inside and immediately began dripping on his floor, looking mortified. "Oh, I'm making such a mess. Floor's been wet before. Wait here." Kaleb disappeared upstairs and returned with some old clothes of Martha's that he'd never been able to bring himself to throw away. He'd packed most of her things into a trunk, but these had remained in the wardrobe, waiting. He handed them to Helena, trying not to think about how strange it felt to see someone else about to wear them. "These should fit you well enough. You can change in the spare room, first door on the right. I'll make some coffee." Helena accepted the clothes with obvious gratitude. "You're very kind. I won't be long." As she disappeared into the spare room, Kaleb busied himself in the kitchen, stoking the fire in the stove and setting the coffee pot on to boil. The house felt different with another person in it. The silence that had become his constant companion seemed less oppressive, pushed back by the sounds of Helena moving around in the other room. When she emerged, wearing Martha's simple blue cotton dress, Kaleb had to turn away. The dress fit her differently than it had fit Martha, Helena being shorter and more curved, but seeing it on another woman sent a pang through his chest that he hadn't anticipated. "Are you all right?" Helena asked softly, noticing his reaction. "Fine." He poured 2 cups of coffee with steady hands. "Just been a while since I had company, that's all." Helena accepted the coffee and wrapped her hands around the warm cup, clearly still chilled. They stood in awkward silence for a moment before she spoke. "The dress belonged to someone important, didn't it?" "I can change back into my wet things if it bothers you." "No," Kaleb met her eyes. "It belonged to my wife. She died 3 years ago, but she'd want someone to get use out of her clothes. She was practical that way." "I'm so sorry for your loss." Helena's voice was gentle, sincere. "And I'm sorry for the imposition. I promise I'll be on my way as soon as the storm passes and I can arrange for a new wagon. Storm's supposed to last through tomorrow, according to the clouds, and even after it passes, you'll need time to get things sorted." Kaleb sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly feeling tired. "You're welcome to stay until you can make proper arrangements. The spare room is yours." "That's very generous." Helena sat down across from him, still clutching her coffee like a lifeline. "I'll try not to be too much trouble. And I'll help out however I can. I'm decent at cooking and I can mend, clean, whatever you need. You don't have to earn your keep. I'm offering out of common decency. I know, but I'd feel better contributing something." She took a sip of coffee and made a small sound of appreciation. "This is very good. I haven't had decent coffee in days." Despite himself, Kaleb felt a small measure of pride. Martha had always said he made the best coffee in Wyoming. "Where were you traveling from?" "Kansas. My parents passed last winter, both of them within weeks of each other. The influenza." Helena's voice grew quiet. "After that, there wasn't much keeping me there. My aunt wrote and said she could use help with her boarding house in Centralia, so I sold the farm and started heading west. Barnaby was my mother's pet goat. I couldn't bear to leave him behind." "That explains why you're so patient with him, even when he's being difficult." Helena laughed, a soft sound that seemed to brighten the dim kitchen. "Patient might be overstating it. I wanted to strangle him at least twice today. But he's the last piece of home I have, you know. Even if he is a troublemaking menace." They talked as the afternoon wore into evening, the conversation coming easier than Kaleb would have expected. Helena told him about growing up on a small farm in Kansas, about learning to read from her mother and to work the land from her father. She spoke of her parents with love and lingering grief, and Kaleb found himself sharing things he hadn't spoken of in years. He told her about building the ranch, about the hard early years when nothing seemed to go right. He spoke of Martha, carefully at first, but Helena listened with such genuine interest that the words came easier. He found himself describing Martha's laugh, the way she sang while doing chores, how she'd wanted children, but they'd never been blessed that way. "She sounds like she was a wonderful person," Helena said when he fell silent. "She was. I didn't think I'd ever want to talk about her again, but it's not as hard as I thought it would be." Kaleb realized with some surprise that this was true. 3 years was a long time to carry grief alone. The storm raged outside, but inside the house felt warm and almost peaceful. Kaleb prepared a simple dinner of beans, salt pork, and biscuits, and Helena insisted on helping despite his protests. They moved around the kitchen together, and Kaleb noticed how naturally she seemed to fit into the space, how she anticipated what needed doing without being told. Over dinner, the conversation turned lighter. Helena had a quick wit and a gift for storytelling, and she had Kaleb actually chuckling at her tales of Barnaby's various misdeeds over the years. "He once ate an entire apple pie my mother had set out to cool," Helena said, her eyes dancing with mirth. "Climbed right up on a chair and then onto the counter. We found him sitting there, covered in apple filling, looking completely unrepentant. 'I'm amazed you didn't turn him into stew.' Mother threatened it, but she loved that ridiculous goat, said he had personality." Helena smiled at the memory, though sadness touched her eyes. She was right, of course. He does have personality, too much of it. After dinner, they sat in the small sitting room, the fire crackling cheerfully. The rain continued its steady drumming on the roof, and occasional thunder rumbled in the distance. Kaleb found himself reluctant to end the evening, though propriety suggested he should probably excuse himself soon. "Can I ask you something personal?" Helena said, breaking a comfortable silence. "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer. Have you been alone here all 3 years since your wife passed? That must be terribly lonely." Kaleb stared into the fire, considering his words. "I have a couple of ranch hands who come by to help during busy seasons. And I go into town for supplies every few weeks. But living here alone, yes, at first I couldn't stand having people around. Everything reminded me of what I'd lost. Then I got used to the quiet and people seemed like too much trouble. And now. He looked at her, this woman who'd stumbled into his life just hours ago. "Now I'm remembering that people aren't always trouble. Sometimes they're just what you need, even if you didn't know you needed it. Helena's cheeks colored slightly, and she looked down at her hands. I felt so alone since my parents died. My aunt is kind to offer me a place, but I've been dreading arriving in a strange town where I don't know anyone but her. Today, even with the storm and the broken wagon and Barnaby being impossible, I felt something I haven't felt in months. What's that? Hopeful. She met his eyes. Like maybe things could be all right again. They sat in silence after that, but it was a warm silence, comfortable. Eventually, Helena excused herself to bed, thanking Kaleb again for his hospitality. He stayed up a while longer, listening to the storm and thinking about the unexpected turn his day had taken. The morning brought continued rain, though less violent than the previous day. Kaleb woke to find Helena already in the kitchen, attempting to make breakfast. She'd found the eggs and was frying them alongside some bacon, looking pleased with herself. "Hope you don't mind," she said when he appeared. "I woke early and thought I'd make myself useful." "I don't mind at all," and he didn't. The smell of cooking breakfast, the sight of someone else moving around his kitchen, it felt right in a way that both comforted and worried him. They ate together, and afterward, Helena insisted on checking on Barnaby. They bundled up in coats and hurried through the rain to the barn. The goat greeted them with enthusiastic bleating and immediately tried to eat Helena's sleeve. "Stop that, you menace," she scolded, but her tone was affectionate. Kaleb watched her interact with the animal, noting her gentleness despite the goat's poor behavior. Barnaby had somehow gotten his rope tangled around a post during the night, and Helena carefully worked to free him while Kaleb tended to his horses. "He likes you," Helena observed as Belle nuzzled Caleb's shoulder. "Known her since she was a foal, raised her myself." Kaleb stroked the mare's neck. "She's getting old now, but she's still the best horse I've ever had." "You love this place, don't you? The ranch, the animals, all of it." "I do. It's the life I always wanted, worked hard to build it." He paused, then added, "Though I'll admit it's felt less like living and more like just existing these past few years." Helena looked at him with understanding. "I know that feeling. After my parents died, I went through the motions every day, but nothing felt real. It was like I was watching someone else live my life." "What changed?" "I suppose deciding to leave did. It was terrifying, selling everything and heading west, but at least it was a decision. At least it was movement instead of standing still in grief." They worked together in the barn for a while, Kaleb showing Helena where everything was kept, Helena helping to clean stalls and refresh water buckets. It was easy work, made easier by the company. When they finally headed back to the house, soaked again despite their coats, they were both laughing about Barnaby's attempt to chew through his rope. The day passed in similar fashion. The rain kept them mostly inside, but Helena found ways to help. She mended a shirt Kaleb had torn weeks ago and never gotten around to fixing. She reorganized his pantry, which had devolved into chaos through years of bachelor neglect. She cooked a lunch of fried potatoes and onions that was better than anything Kaleb had made for himself in recent memory. And they talked. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories, sharing opinions on topics ranging from politics to the best way to make cornbread. Kaleb found himself laughing more in one day than he had in 3 years. That evening, as they sat by the fire again, Helena grew quiet. Kaleb noticed her staring into the flames with a troubled expression. "What's on your mind?" he asked. "I'm wondering if I should stay here," she said softly. "Not here at your ranch, I mean, but in this area instead of going on to Centralia. I know that probably sounds mad. I've only been here a day, but this feels right somehow. Does that make any sense?" Kaleb's heart had started beating faster at her words, but he kept his voice steady. It makes sense. Sometimes you just know when you've found where you belong. My aunt will be disappointed. She's counting on my help. Would she begrudge you happiness if you found it elsewhere? Helena turned to look at him, and the firelight cast shadows across her face, making her eyes seem darker, more mysterious. No, she wouldn't. She's always said family should support each other's joy. But Kaleb, I need to be honest with you about something. His chest tightened. All right. I'm attracted to you. I know that's forward of me to say, and I know we barely know each other, but I feel something when I'm around you. Something I haven't felt before, not even with the few boys who courted me back home. Her cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. And I need to know if I'm crazy, or if you feel anything similar, because if I'm imagining this connection between us, I need to know now before I make a fool of myself. Kaleb sat in stunned silence for a moment. He'd felt the attraction too, had felt it from the moment she'd looked up at him in the rain with those warm brown eyes. But he'd buried it, told himself it was too soon, too sudden, too risky to open his heart again. You're not imagining it, he finally said. I feel it too. And it scares the hell out of me if I'm being honest. I loved Martha with everything I had. When she died, I thought that was it for me. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone, and I'd made my peace with that. Then you show up with your stubborn goat and your kindness and your laugh, and suddenly, I'm remembering what it felt like to want someone around. Helena's eyes had grown bright with unshed tears. I'm scared too. What if this is just loneliness? What if we're both so desperate for connection that we're mistaking it for something deeper? That's possible, Kaleb admitted, but I don't think that's what this is. I've been lonely for 3 years, and I never felt about any other woman the way I feel about you. This is different. So what do we do? Kaleb stood and crossed to where she sat, then held out his hand. She took it, and he pulled her gently to her feet. They stood close, not quite touching except where their hands joined. He could smell the soap she'd used that morning, could see the pulse beating at her throat. I think we take this slow, he said. I think we spend more time together, let you stay here as long as you need to and see where this goes. No pressure, no rush. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing if what they feel is real. I'd like that. Helena squeezed his hand. I'd like that very much. The storm finally broke the next morning, giving way to brilliant sunshine that made the wet landscape sparkle. Kaleb took Helena out to see her broken wagon, which was indeed in bad shape. The axle was cracked clean through, and one wheel was damaged beyond repair. I'll take you into town, Kaleb said, examining the damage. We can see about getting this fixed, or you might be better off just selling it for scrap and buying a new wagon if you're planning to travel on. I'd like to go to town, Helena said. I should probably send a telegram to my aunt. Let her know I'm delayed and explain the situation. They hitched Belle to Kaleb's smaller wagon and made the trip to Centralia, which took about an hour over the muddy roads. The town was small but growing, with a main street featuring a general store, saloon, church, bank, and various other establishments. People looked at Helena with open curiosity as she walked beside Kaleb, and he could practically hear the gossip starting. He didn't care. Let them talk. He'd been the tragic widower for 3 years, and while he'd always appreciated the town's respect for his grief, he was tired of the pitying looks. Having Helena beside him felt like stepping back into the world of the living. They stopped at the telegraph office first, where Helena composed a careful message to her aunt explaining the situation, and saying she'd send more news soon. Then they visited the general store, where Kaleb insisted on buying Helena a few basic necessities since all her belongings were still in the broken wagon. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the store with her husband, barely contained her curiosity. I don't believe we've met, dear, she said to Helena, her eyes darting between the two of them. Helena Oakes, Helena said politely. I'm staying at Mr. Lawson's ranch temporarily while I sort out some travel difficulties. I see, Mrs. Patterson's tone suggested she saw plenty and was drawing all sorts of conclusions. Well, welcome to Centralia, Miss Oakes. Always nice to have new faces in town. They made a few more stops, including the wagon repair shop, where the owner confirmed that Helena's wagon was a total loss but offered a fair price for the salvageable parts. By the time they headed back to the ranch, it was late afternoon, and they were both tired but in good spirits. That went well, Helena said as they rode. Mrs. Patterson seemed nice, even if she was clearly dying of curiosity about us. She'll have the whole town talking by Sunday service, Kaleb said with amusement. But that's how small towns work. Everyone knows everyone's business. Does it bother you, people talking about us? Not anymore. There was a time when I couldn't stand the attention, right after Martha died. Everyone meant well, but their constant concern felt suffocating. But now I think maybe it's time people had something new to talk about regarding Kaleb Lawson. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Helena stayed in the spare room, keeping things proper, but they spent their days together. She helped around the ranch, revealing herself to be a harder worker than Kaleb had anticipated. She could handle horses well, wasn't afraid of hard physical labor, and had a natural way with the few cattle he kept. Barnaby continued to be a menace, escaping his pen regularly and causing havoc. One memorable afternoon, the goat somehow got into the house and ate half a loaf of bread before they caught him. Another time, he chased Kaleb's rooster around the yard until both animals were exhausted. I'm starting to think your mother kept him around for entertainment, Kaleb said after the rooster incident, and Helena laughed so hard she had to sit down. But beyond the daily work and Barnaby's antics, something deeper was growing between them. They continued their evening talks by the fire, opening up about their hopes and fears. Helena spoke of her dream of having a real home again, of maybe having children someday and giving them the loving childhood she'd had. Kaleb shared his own long-buried dreams of expanding the ranch, of maybe breeding horses more seriously. He told her about the years before Martha's death, the good times they'd shared, and Helena listened without jealousy, understanding that his past had shaped who he was. One evening, about 3 weeks after Helena's arrival, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset when Kaleb reached over and took her hand. It was the first time they'd touched beyond accidental brushes since that night by the fire, and Helena's fingers curled around his with quiet certainty. I've been thinking, Kaleb said, watching the sky turn gold and pink. About the future, about what I want. And what do you want? Helena's voice was soft, hopeful. I want you to stay, not just as a guest, not just until you figure out your travel plans. I want you to stay because this is your home, because you belong here with me. He turned to face her, his heart pounding. I know it hasn't been long, but every day I'm more certain. I love you, Helena. I love your kindness and your strength and your ridiculous goat. I love the way you make this house feel like a home again. I love the sound of your voice and the way you look at the world with hope even after everything you've lost. Tears were streaming down Helena's face now, but she was smiling. I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you that first night, watching you be so kind even though I was a stranger who'd imposed on you terribly. And every day since, I've fallen more deeply. I want to stay, Kaleb. I want this to be my home with you. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, but she didn't. Their lips met in a gentle kiss that spoke of new beginnings and healed hearts. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Will you marry me? Kaleb asked. I know it's fast, and if you want to wait, I'll understand, but I'm sure about this. I'm sure about you." "Yes," Helena said without hesitation. "Yes, I'll marry you, I'm sure too." They sat together on the porch until the stars came out, making plans and dreaming about their future. They decided to marry within the month, seeing no reason to wait when they were both certain of their feelings. Helena would send word to her aunt, inviting her to the wedding. Kaleb would speak to the preacher in town. The news of their engagement spread through Centralia like wildfire. Some people were surprised by the speed of the courtship, but most were happy for Kaleb. He'd grieved long enough, they said. He deserved happiness again. The wedding took place on a beautiful October morning in the small church on the edge of town. Helena's aunt had arrived 2 days before, a warm woman in her 50s who immediately approved of Kaleb and the ranch. A few of Kaleb's friends and neighbors attended, along with most of the town, everyone curious to see the widowed cowboy wed the mysterious woman from Kansas. Helena wore a simple white dress that her aunt had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair that Kaleb had picked that morning. She looked beautiful, radiant with joy, and when Kaleb saw her walking down the aisle, he felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. He'd thought his chance at happiness had died with Martha, but here was Helena, giving him a second chance he'd never expected to receive. They exchanged vows in steady voices, Kaleb's hands firm and sure as he held Helena's trembling ones. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Kaleb kissed his new bride with a passion that made some of the older ladies in the congregation fan themselves. The reception was held in the town hall, a modest affair with food brought by neighbors and friends. Someone brought a fiddle, and there was dancing. Kaleb, who hadn't danced since Martha's death, found himself spinning Helena around the floor, both of them laughing like children. Helena's aunt pulled Kaleb aside at one point, her eyes serious. "You'll take care of her." "With my life," Kaleb promised. "She's the best thing that's happened to me in years. I won't take that for granted." "Good. She deserves happiness. They both did, my sister and her husband. Died too young, left that girl alone in the world. I'm glad she found you." "I think I'm the one who got lucky," Kaleb said, watching Helena dance with one of the town's old-timers who'd asked for the honor. "She could have gone anywhere, done anything. But she chose me, chose this life. I'll spend the rest of my days trying to be worthy of that choice." Later that night, after the celebration had ended and they'd returned to the ranch, now they're ranched together, Kaleb carried Helena over the threshold. It was tradition, he said, even if they'd both been living there for weeks. She laughed and let him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, two people learning each other's bodies and hearts with gentle reverence. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Kaleb's bed, now their bed, and talked until sleep claimed them. "I used to lie here alone at night and think the emptiness would swallow me whole," Kaleb admitted in the darkness. "Now I can't imagine this bed without you in it." "You'll never have to," Helena promised, snuggling closer. "I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. You're my home." The years that followed were rich with love and life. Helena proved herself an invaluable partner in running the ranch, her organizational skills and hard work complementing Kaleb's knowledge and strength. They expanded the operation slowly, carefully, breeding horses as Kaleb had dreamed. Helena had a gift for training them, a patience and understanding that produced some of the finest horses in the territory. Barnaby continued to be a beloved menace, somehow living far longer than any goat had a right to. He became something of a local legend, known throughout Centralia for his escapes and antics. Children would visit the ranch just to see the famous troublemaking goat, and Helena would tell them stories about his adventures while Barnaby preened under the attention. Helena's aunt visited regularly, often staying for weeks at a time. She and Kaleb got along wonderfully, and she doted on Helena, happy to see her niece so content. The ranch became known for its hospitality, with friends and neighbors often stopping by for meals and conversation. About a year after the wedding, Helena discovered she was pregnant. The joy on Kaleb's face when she told him brought tears to her eyes. He'd wanted children with Martha and never had the chance. Now he would be a father after all. What if I'm not good at this? He asked one night, his hand resting on Helena's growing belly. What if I don't know how to be a father? You'll be wonderful, Helena assured him. Look how gentle you are with the horses, how patient with Barnaby despite his nonsense. And more importantly, look at how you love. That's what children need most, to be loved and to know they're loved. Everything else we can figure out together. Their first child, a son, was born on a spring morning when the meadows were full of wildflowers. They named him Kieran, and Kaleb wept when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed by love and relief. The boy was healthy and strong, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's determined chin. Fatherhood transformed Kaleb in ways he hadn't anticipated. He'd been a good man before, responsible and hardworking, but having a child gave him a new purpose. He worked harder to make the ranch successful, wanting to build something substantial to pass on to his son. But he also learned to play, rediscovering joy in simple things as he saw the world through Kieran's eyes. 2 years later, they had a daughter, Lily, who had her father's sandy hair and her mother's quick wit. The ranch house rang with children's laughter, and Kaleb often found himself pausing in his work just to listen to it, marveling at how his life had changed. Helena flourished as a mother, nurturing but not smothering, encouraging her children to be independent while making sure they knew they were loved. She taught them to read and write, to respect animals and the land, to be kind but not weak. And she continued to work the ranch alongside Kaleb, the two of them partners in every sense. The children adored Barnaby, who somehow seemed to understand that small humans required more patience than adults. He let them ride on his back, feed him treats, and dress him up in ribbons for tea parties. When Kieran was 5 and Lily was 3, Barnaby saved Lily from a rattlesnake, charging at the creature and butting it away before it could strike. After that, he was forever the family hero, even when he ate an entire wedding cake that Helena had baked for a neighbor's celebration. Years passed in a blur of seasons, each one bringing new challenges and joys. The ranch prospered under their joint stewardship, becoming one of the most successful horse breeding operations in the region. Kaleb's horses were known for their temperament and strength, and buyers came from as far as Montana and Colorado. Helena became a respected figure in Centralia, known for her kindness and practical help. She assisted with births when the doctor was unavailable, organized church socials, and always had a meal ready for anyone who needed one. The community that had once been Kaleb's alone became theirs together, a network of friendship and mutual support. Kieran grew into a serious boy with his father's love of horses and the land. By the time he was 10, he could ride as well as most men and was already helping with the horse training. Lily was more adventurous, always climbing trees and exploring, keeping her parents on their toes with her endless energy and curiosity. One evening, when Kieran was 12 and Lily was 10, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset. It had become a tradition over the years, this time together at the end of the day. Barnaby lay at their feet, finally slowing down in his old age. "Tell us the story again," Lily begged. "About how you met Papa." Helena smiled and exchanged a glance with Kaleb. They'd told the story countless times, but it never grew old. "Well," she began, "it was a terrible storm, the worst I'd ever seen. The wagon had broken and I was soaked through, and Barnaby was being absolutely impossible. "He's always impossible," Kieran interjected, grinning when Barnaby raised his head and bleated indignantly. "True enough," Helena continued. "But that day he was especially bad. And then through the rain I saw this ranch house, and I thought maybe someone there could help. And there was your father, standing in the storm, looking very serious and not at all happy about a strange woman and her goat appearing on his property." "I wasn't unhappy," Kaleb protested mildly, as he always did at this part. "Just surprised." "You were covered in mud within minutes because Barnaby knocked you over," Helena reminded him, laughing. "But you were kind anyway. You brought us in, gave us shelter, and changed both our lives forever." "Best thing Barnaby ever did was knock me in the mud that day," Kaleb said. "Humbled me enough to see what was right in front of me." "A wet, bedraggled woman with a troublesome goat," Helena teased. "The woman I was going to spend the rest of my life loving," Kaleb corrected, reaching over to take her hand. Lily made a face at the romantic talk, but Kieran smiled. He understood now, at 12, the rare gift his parents had in each other. He saw how they still looked at each other after all these years, how they worked together seamlessly, how they laughed at each other's jokes even after hearing them 100 times. "I want to find love like that someday," Lily announced, "but probably without the goat part." "The goat is essential," Helena said seriously. "How else will you know your future husband is patient and kind?" They all laughed, and Barnaby bleated again, clearly agreeing that he was indeed essential. As the stars came out and the children eventually went inside to prepare for bed, Kaleb and Helena remained on the porch, sitting close together as they had on so many evenings over the years. "Do you ever think about that day?" Helena asked softly. "About what might have happened if you hadn't been there, if you'd turned me away, if we'd made different choices?" "All the time," Kaleb admitted. "And then I thank God that I was there, that I didn't turn you away, that we made exactly the choices we did. You saved me, Helena. I was drowning in grief and loneliness, and I didn't even know it. You brought me back to life." "We saved each other," Helena said. "I was lost and afraid, and you gave me a home and a purpose, and a love I'd never dared dream of. Everything good in my life now came from that stormy day when Barnaby led me to your door. Then I guess I owe that contrary old goat more than I ever thought I would." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, the crickets chirping and the distant call of an owl. Inside, they could hear the children getting ready for bed, their voices carrying through the open windows. "You think Kieran will take over the ranch someday?" Helena mused. "He loves it so much, and he's already so skilled with the horses." "I think so, if that's what he wants. And if Lily wants a part in it too, there's room for both of them. We've built something good here, something worth passing on." Kaleb squeezed Helena's hand. "But that's years away yet. Right now, I just want to enjoy these days, watching them grow, working beside you, living this life we built together." "It's a good life," Helena agreed. "Better than I ever imagined when I left Kansas. Sometimes I think about that terrified woman struggling through the rain with her stubborn goat, and I want to tell her that everything is going to be more than all right. It's going to be wonderful." "She wouldn't believe you," Kaleb said with a smile. "I know I wouldn't have believed it if someone had told me that day that I was meeting my future wife, that I'd be this happy again. Grief makes it hard to see possibilities. But love opens up the world," Helena finished. "I'm so grateful for you, Kaleb. For your kindness that day, for your patience as we learned each other, for the life you've given me. I'm grateful for you every single day, for your laughter and your strength, for the children you've given me, for making this house a home again." He pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "I love you, Helena Lawson. I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," she whispered back. Always and forever. More years passed, bringing their share of challenges along with the continued joys. There were hard winters when they worried about the livestock, dry summers when the grass turned brown and they had to haul water from the creek. There were illnesses that scared them, accidents that could have been worse than they were, market fluctuations that threatened their prosperity. But through it all, Kaleb and Helena faced every challenge together, their partnership only growing stronger with time. They'd learned early on that they were better together than apart, that their individual strengths complemented each other perfectly. When Kieran was 15, he announced his intention to become a full partner in the ranch operations. Kaleb couldn't have been prouder, and together they planned expansions and improvements. Lily, now 13, declared she wanted to study veterinary medicine, a new and rare pursuit for a woman, but her parents encouraged her dreams. Helena began teaching her everything she knew about animal care, while Kaleb contacted a veterinarian in Cheyenne about apprenticeship possibilities. Barnaby finally passed peacefully one winter night, surrounded by the family who'd loved him. He was ancient by goat standards, having lived nearly 20 years. They buried him in the meadow where he'd loved to graze, and even Kaleb, who'd spent years grumbling about the troublesome animal, shed tears at his passing. "He brought us together," Helena said at the simple graveside service. "For that alone, he deserves to be remembered as the best goat who ever lived, even if he was impossible." The children, now nearly grown, shared stories of Barnaby's antics, laughing through their tears. The family stood together in the cold winter air, honoring the cantankerous creature who'd been part of their story from the beginning. After Barnaby's death, Helena surprised them all by announcing she was pregnant again. She was 41 now, and they'd thought their family was complete. But life, as always, had its own plans. "Another adventure," Kaleb said when she told him, his initial shock giving way to joy. "We're not as young as we were, but we'll manage." "We've managed everything else," Helena agreed. "And Kieran and Lily are old enough to help now. Besides, I think there's room in this family for one more." Their third child, another son they named Marcus, was born that spring. Kieran was 17 now, and Lily was 15, both old enough to be genuinely excited about a baby brother. They doted on Marcus, and Kaleb marveled at seeing his older children so tender with their little brother. Holding his infant son, watching his older children with him, Kaleb reflected on the unexpected journey his life had taken. If someone had told him 20 years ago that he'd lose Martha but find love again, have 3 children, and build a thriving ranch with a woman he met during a storm, he'd never have believed it. But here he was, 50 years old now, with silver threading through his sandy hair, holding his youngest child while his wife supervised dinner preparations with help from their daughter. Through the window, he could see Kieran working with one of the horses, his movements confident and skilled. This was his life now, rich and full and more than he'd ever dared hope for after Martha's death. Helena came to sit beside him, resting her head on his shoulder as they watched Marcus sleep. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "How grateful I am. How lucky. How much I love you and our children and this life we've built." He kissed the top of her head. "And I'm thinking about that storm 20 years ago and how it brought me everything I didn't know I needed." "We should probably tell Marcus when he's older that storms can bring good things," Helena said with a smile. "Most people teach their children to fear bad weather, but for us, a storm brought blessings." "A storm, a stubborn goat, and a brave woman who refused to give up even when everything went wrong," Kaleb corrected. "That's what brought the blessings." As evening fell and the family gathered for dinner, the house filled with conversation and laughter. Kieran talked about his plans for the ranch, suggesting breeding programs and innovations. Lily shared what she'd learned from the veterinary books Kaleb had ordered for her. Marcus slept peacefully in his cradle nearby, occasionally making small sounds that melted everyone's hearts. Helena and Kaleb exchanged glances across the table, communicating without words as they'd learned to do over 20 years of marriage. They'd built this together. This family, this home, this life. And it was good. The years continued their inexorable march forward. Kieran took over more of the ranch operations as Kaleb's body grew less willing to handle the physical demands of the work. But Kaleb didn't mind. He'd never been vain about aging, and he was proud to see his son stepping into the role with skill and dedication. Lily eventually left for a veterinary apprenticeship in Cheyenne, breaking her parents' hearts even as they swelled with pride. She wrote regularly, filling her letters with medical observations and personal news. She'd met a young man, she reported in one letter, another veterinary student who shared her passion for animal welfare. Helena and Kaleb exchanged knowing looks when they read that letter. Marcus grew from baby to boy to young man, energetic and curious, with his mother's warm heart and his father's steady nature. He loved the ranch but also showed artistic talent, spending hours sketching the horses and landscapes. Helena encouraged all his interests, believing children should be free to find their own paths. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Kaleb and Helena renewed their vows in the same church where they'd first married. Kieran stood up for his father while Lily, home for a visit, stood with her mother. Marcus, now a gangly 14-year-old, held the rings. Helena's aunt attended again, now in her 70s but still spry. After the ceremony, there was another reception, this one attended by even more people than the first. The ranch had become well known throughout the region, and the Lawson family was respected and loved in Centralia. People came to celebrate not just the anniversary but the life Kaleb and Helena had built together. 20 years, Helena marveled that night as they lay in bed, both tired but happy. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best 20 years of my life, Kaleb said. And I mean that. Even counting the good years with Martha. What we have, Helena, it's something special. It's not just love, though God knows I love you more than I can express. It's partnership, friendship, passion, comfort, all woven together into something bigger than either of us alone. I know what you mean. I can't imagine my life without you anymore. You're part of me, woven into every thought and dream and plan. She turned to face him in the darkness. I want to grow old with you, Kaleb. I want to watch our children have children, sit on the porch with you when we're both gray and creaky, and still hold your hand like we did on that first evening. That's exactly what we'll do, he promised. I'm not going anywhere and neither are you. We're in this together until the end, however long that is. More time passed, bringing the changes time always brings. Kieran married a local girl named Sarah, a sensible woman who loved the ranch almost as much as he did. They had their first child, a daughter named Martha, and Kaleb wept when they told him the name. Helena held him as he cried, understanding that these were tears of healing, of the circle of life continuing. Being grandparents suited Kaleb and Helena perfectly. They doted on little Martha, marveling at her every accomplishment, but they were also content to hand her back to her parents when she was fussy. They'd earned the right to enjoy grandchildren without the full-time responsibility. Lily came home for a visit with her new husband, David, the veterinary student she'd written about. They set up a veterinary practice in Centralia, Lily becoming the first female veterinarian in the region. She faced prejudice from some, but her skill and dedication won over most skeptics. Kaleb and Helena were fiercely proud of her courage in pursuing her dreams despite the obstacles. Marcus eventually decided to pursue art more seriously, moving to Denver to study but returning home frequently. He never married, seeming content with his work and his family. His paintings of the ranch and the surrounding landscape began to gain recognition, and Kaleb's office became a gallery of his son's work. As Kaleb and Helena entered their 60s, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Kieran and Sarah ran things now, though Kaleb still offered advice when asked. He and Helena spent their days in gentler pursuits, tending a garden, visiting with their growing number of grandchildren, sitting on the porch in the evenings as they'd always done. "You have any regrets?" Helena asked one evening as they watched the sunset. It was a question she'd asked before over the years, and his answer was always the same. "Not a single one," Kaleb said firmly. "My life didn't turn out the way I planned when I was young. I lost Martha, and that grief nearly destroyed me. But then you came, and everything changed. You gave me a second chance at happiness, at family, at love. How could I regret anything that led me to you?" "I don't regret anything either," Helena said softly. "Not the hardships in Kansas, not my parents' deaths, not even the broken wagon and that terrible storm, because it all led me here to you, to this life. I'm so grateful, Kaleb, for every day we've had together, every laugh, every tear, every moment." "We're not done yet," Kaleb pointed out. "We've got years left in us." "I know. And I plan to spend every one of those years loving you." They did have more years, good years filled with the joys of watching their family grow. More grandchildren arrived, the house often full of young voices and energy. Kieran and Sarah proved to be excellent parents, raising their children with the same combination of love and practical wisdom that Kaleb and Helena had used. Lily and David's veterinary practice thrived, and they eventually had children of their own, twins who showed early signs of inheriting their mother's way with animals. Marcus achieved significant success as an artist, his work shown in galleries throughout the West, but he always came home to Wyoming, saying it was where his soul belonged. Helena's aunt passed peacefully at age 85, surrounded by family. Her funeral was a celebration of a life well lived, and Helena mourned her but also felt grateful for the years they'd had together, for her aunt's support and love during difficult times. As Kaleb reached 70, his body began to slow more noticeably. He walked with a slight limp from old injuries, and his hands weren't as steady as they'd been. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Helena never wavered. If anything, it grew deeper, mellowing into something profound and unshakable. Helena, at 66, had kept her vitality better than Kaleb, though her hair was now completely silver and laugh lines creased her face. She was still beautiful to him, more beautiful than the day he'd first seen her bedraggled in the rain. Time had only revealed more of her character, her strength, her capacity for love. They spent their days quietly now, enjoying simple pleasures. Helena still tended her garden, growing vegetables and flowers with equal care. Kaleb still worked with horses when he felt up to it, though now he mostly supervised while younger men did the physical work. They read together, played cards, entertained their grandchildren, and always ended their days on the porch watching the sunset. 30 years, Helena said on their 30th anniversary. 3 decades of marriage, of building this life together. It's remarkable when you think about it. "It's gone by in a heartbeat," Kaleb said. "I remember the day you arrived like it was yesterday. That storm, that goat, those eyes of yours looking at me so hopefully. I was lost and you found me." "We found each other," Helena corrected gently. "That's what makes it special. We were both lost in different ways and we found our way together. They celebrated quietly that year, just family, but it was perfect. Their children toasted them. Their grandchildren performed a little play they'd written about the day their grandparents met, complete with someone dressed as Barnaby causing chaos. Everyone laughed until they cried, and Kaleb felt his heart so full he thought it might burst. That night, lying in bed with Helena in his arms, Kaleb reflected on the journey that had brought them here. He thought about Martha, remembering her with love but without the sharp pain that had once accompanied those memories. She would have wanted him to be happy, he knew. She would have liked Helena, he thought, would have approved of the life they'd built and the family they'd raised. "Thank you," he whispered into Helena's silver hair. "For what?" she murmured sleepily. "For everything. For loving me, for this family, for making every day an adventure, for being patient when I was still figuring out how to live again. For this life." Helena shifted to look at him, her eyes still bright despite her age. "Thank you for being brave enough to let me in, for taking a chance on a strange woman with a stubborn goat, for building this beautiful life with me. I love you, Kaleb Lawson. I'll love you forever." "Forever," he echoed, kissing her gently. "That's a promise." The following years brought the inevitable sorrows of aging. Friends passed, health issues arose, the world changed in ways that sometimes felt too fast. But through it all, Kaleb and Helena had each other, their love a constant in an inconstant world. When Kaleb was 75 and Helena 71, they decided to take one last trip. They wanted to see the meadow where Barnaby was buried, wanted to ride out to the ridge where Helena had first spotted the ranch all those years ago. Kieran worried it was too much for them, but they insisted. On a beautiful spring morning, they set out on horseback, moving slowly but steadily. The land around them was unchanged in many ways, still wild and beautiful. They found Barnaby's grave, marked by a simple stone Kaleb had carved years before, and stood there holding hands. "He was a good goat," Kaleb said solemnly, "even if he was impossible." Helena laughed, the sound carrying across the meadow. "He was perfect. He brought me to you, and for that I'll always be grateful to that contrary old creature." They continued to the ridge, and Helena pointed out the path she'd taken that stormy day. "I was so scared," she admitted. "Everything had gone wrong, and I thought maybe I'd made a terrible mistake leaving Kansas. Then I saw your ranch house, and something in me said there, that's where you need to be." "Some people might call that fate," Kaleb said. "Some people might call it God's plan," Helena countered. "Or just luck. I don't know what it was, but I'm grateful for it every day." They stood together on that ridge, looking down at the ranch spread out below them. The house they'd shared for over 3 decades. The barn where Barnaby had stayed that first night. The corrals where they'd raised countless horses. The meadows where their children had played and their grandchildren now ran. "It's a good life," Kaleb said, echoing words Helena had spoken so many years before. "Better than I ever imagined." "It's our life," Helena said simply. "That's what makes it good." They rode back slowly, content with their memories and their present. That evening, surrounded by their family for Sunday dinner as had become tradition, they watched as their children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and love. This was their legacy, not just the ranch but the family they'd built, the love they'd nurtured and passed on. As the sun set and the family gradually departed, leaving just the two of them on the familiar porch, Kaleb reached for Helena's hand. She took it without hesitation, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "I want you to know," Kaleb said quietly, "that you made me believe in second chances. You showed me that life doesn't end with loss, that hearts can heal, that love can bloom again even in the hardest soil. You saved me, Helena." "And you saved me," Helena replied. "You gave me a home when I had none, a family when I'd lost mine, a love I'd never known before. We saved each other, Kaleb. That's what love does. It saves us. The years continued their march as they always do. Eventually, time claimed Kaleb at the age of 78, his heart giving out peacefully one night with Helena beside him. He died as he'd lived his later years, surrounded by love in the home he'd built, with the woman he loved holding his hand. Helena mourned him deeply, but she also celebrated the life they'd shared. At his funeral, she stood strong, supported by her children and grandchildren, and spoke of the man who'd given a desperate woman and her goat shelter on a stormy day, not knowing he was inviting in his future. She lived 4 more years, years filled with family and memories. She spent her time with grandchildren and great-grandchildren who appeared, telling them stories about their grandfather, about Barnaby, about the storm that had changed everything. She tended her garden and sat on the porch every evening, feeling Kaleb's presence beside her even though he was gone. When her time came, she went peacefully in her sleep, a smile on her face. Her children, going through her things afterward, found a letter she'd written to be opened after her death. In it, she thanked each of her children for the joy they'd brought her. She spoke of her love for them and their families. And she wrote about Kaleb, about the unexpected gift of their love, about how a storm and a stubborn goat had led her to the greatest happiness she'd ever known. The letter ended with simple words. Love is worth every risk. Love is worth the storms. Love is worth opening your heart even when it's been broken before. I lived this truth, and I died grateful for every moment of it. They buried Helena beside Kaleb on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land and the family they'd built together. And on her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, Kieran had inscribed words that seemed to sum up his mother's philosophy. She loved deeply and well, and was loved in return. The ranch continued through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story, while honoring the foundation Kaleb and Helena had built. On quiet evenings, family members still gathered on that same porch, watching sunsets and telling stories about the widowed cowboy and the woman with the mischievous goat who'd found love in a storm. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, people swore they could hear laughter carrying across the meadows, the sound of 2 souls who'd found their second chance at happiness and made it last forever.